This is Tom and Paula Grace from Light of Christ Radio with a story from our series on the book of Esther entitled For Such a Time as This.
You're welcome to watch this video simply for the story, or you can use it as the basis of a small group study.
The small group study instructions are below the video in the More section.
Today we conclude our series For Such a Time as This with the story of the triumph of the Jews from Esther 9 and 10.
Well, Paula, as we begin our conversation today, let's look at the context of our story.
Haman, an enemy of the Jews, schemed to destroy them. He had cast lots, or the pur, to determine the best day to kill the Jews.
Well, then Haman manipulated the king to send out a decree declaring to kill all Jews on that day.
When Queen Esther revealed the truth behind Haman, the king ordered his death on Haman's own gallows.
Then the king authorized Mordecai, Esther's cousin, to write a new decree to counter the decree of Haman.
So the Jews were allowed to destroy anyone who might attack them or their children and wives, and to take the property of their enemies. And this brings us to a story from the Word of God.
On March 7th, the king's order came into effect. This was the very day that the enemies of the Jews had planned to overpower them. But the tables were now turned. The Jews overpowered those who hated them.
The Jews gathered in the cities throughout King Xerxes' provinces to lay hands on those who were seeking their ruin. Everyone was afraid of the Jews, and no one could do anything to oppose them.
What's more, all of the government officials actually helped the Jews because of the fear of Mordecai. Mordecai by now was a power in the palace. As Mordecai became more and more powerful, his reputation had grown in all the provinces.
So the Jews finished off all their enemies with the sword, slaughtering them right and left, and did as they pleased to those who hated them. In Susa, the Jews massacred 500 men. They also killed the 10 sons of Haman, the archenemy of the Jews.
But they took no plunder. That day, when it was all over, the number of those killed in the palace complex was given to the king. The king told Queen Esther, in Susa, the Jews had killed 500 men, plus Haman's 10 sons. Think of the killing that must have been done in the rest of the provinces. What else do you want? Name it, and it's yours. Your wish is my command.
If it pleased the king, Queen Esther responded, give the Jews of Susa permission to extend the terms of the order another day, and had the bodies of Haman's 10 sons hanged in public display on the gallows.
The king commanded it. The order was extended. The bodies of Haman's 10 sons were publicly hanged. Then the Jews at Susa gathered together on March 8th and killed 300 more men. And again, they took no plunder.
Meanwhile, in the rest of the king's provinces, the Jews had organized and defended themselves, freeing themselves from oppression. They killed 75,000 of those who hated them, but did not take any plunder. They spent the next day resting and celebrating the victory.
Mordecai and Esther sent out letters to encourage the Jews to celebrate their victory over their enemies. They were to call this celebration Purim, after the pur or dice that had determined the day for their destruction, which had been reversed.
It became a tradition for them, their children, and all future converts to remember March 7th and 8th every year. They celebrated with feasting and gladness and by giving gifts of food to each other and presents to the poor. The celebration continued through the generations.
It commemorated a time when the Jews gained a relief from their enemies, when their sorrow was turned into gladness and their mourning into joy.
Mordecai, the Jew, ranked second in command to King Xerxes. He was popular among the Jews and greatly respected by them. He worked hard for the good of his people, and he cared for the peace and prosperity of his race. And this is a story from the Word of God.
If you are using this video for a small group application, after you've watched this video, try retelling the story from what you've heard.
Then read the text. Discussion questions are below the video in the More section.
We hope you'll discover something from this story to apply to your everyday life.
May you be blessed.